Sorry about that. Good evening. I'm Shannon Emmons with the Garland County Library, and this is our latest edition of Author Talk. My guest tonight is Talya Boerner, and her most recent book is Bernice Runs Away. It's about an octogenarian whose daughter's trying to convince her to move into, assisted living, and Bernice is having none of it. So let me introduce Talya.
Hi.
Hello. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for inviting me.
So tell me a little bit about Bernice, please.
So Bernice, let's see, I have her right here. Bernice is 81. She lives in Northeast Arkansas, and her daughter, Sarah, wants her to actually live in her back. She's building a little carriage house.
Oh, yes.
Her backyard, and she wants her to move to Atlanta from Arkansas, and Bernice is not ready to do that. And so Bernice has her own ideas and decides that she, instead of moving, is going to run away from home. And so in the process, she sets out to return to a place that's very near and dear to her, but she also sets out to answer a couple of questions, sort of unresolved issues in her life. So it's sort of a coming of age story for octogenarian.
I love that. I mean, we're always transforming, so why not at 81? So, and you have, I believe, do you have two other books out?
I have two other books. My first book is The Accidental Salvation of Gracie Lee, and it was published in 2016. It's also set in the Arkansas Delta in the 70s. And it's a coming of age story of Gracie Lee, who's a 10-year-old farm girl. And it is somewhat autobiographical, but it is, the plot line is fictional. So it's Southern fiction. And then my second book is Gene Everywhere, and it's actually memoir, and it is set in Dallas, which is where I lived for a long time, but it has ties to Arkansas also, and it's about the 6 weeks that I spent taking care of my father-in-law who was 90. So that book's really near and dear to my heart because he's the person that encouraged me to follow my dream of writing.
Oh, I love that. I know we have your first two titles here at the library, and I think Bernice is on her way. So, now you had a presentation to share with us. Well, I guess first I should ask, where can viewers find your books?
Well, hopefully at the libraries across Arkansas, and if you can't find it there, I feel that if you will ask the librarians to order it, most have been really accommodating in that way. It's also available on Amazon and Barnes & Noble and just any, like Walmart.com, you can buy it. It's also available through me. I send out signed copies through my author website, which is TalyaTateBoerner.com.
Okay, wonderful. Wonderful. Okay, so tell me about your presentation tonight.
So tonight I wanted to talk a little bit about my writing inspiration, just where I get inspiration for my writing. And I also wanted to talk just a little bit at the end about the importance of telling our stories. I feel like we're all storytellers, and it's just important that we tell those stories.
I completely agree. Okay, well, I'll get out of your way, and let's see if we can get this to go the way it should.
Okay.
All right.
I want to talk just a bit about writing inspiration and the importance of telling our stories. I grew up, just a little bit about me. I grew up in Mississippi County, which is in Northeast Arkansas, right along the Mississippi River. So I am a 4th generation farm girl. All of my people are farmers, all the way back to my great grandmother. And but when I went off to college, I actually went to Texas. And so I ended up living in Dallas for almost 30 years, working as a commercial lender. So I was in banking for years, but I always wanted to write. And so, like I said before, the 6-week period that I spent with my father-in-law, he's sort of the person that encouraged me to follow my dream of writing. And so in 2014, my husband and I moved to Fayetteville. So now I live on the other side of the state, but I always go back to the Delta part of Arkansas as often as I can because my mom still farms there. She still has the farm, and she kind of splits her time between Mississippi County and Fayetteville. So I tell you all that because when I talk about what inspires my writing, I think it's important for me as a writer to tap into what inspires me. But even if you're not a writer, I think it's really important to think about what inspires you as well, because these are the things that make us tick. These are the things that make us happy, that give us joy. And so for me as a writer, if I can tap into those things and weave that inspiration into my writing, I feel like I can better touch my reader. So a few of the things that really inspire me. The first one is nature and gardening. And these are not necessarily in any order, but one thing I've noticed is if I look back throughout my life, if I find times in my life when maybe I wasn't, I was kind of in a rut or not quite so happy, I probably wasn't spending time in these things that inspire me. So these are things that really have inspired me my whole life. So nature and gardening, I've always enjoyed being in nature and I've always enjoyed gardening. And so for me, if I am writing and I get stuck writing, if I have sort of a writing block, I can just go out into nature. I can spend 30 minutes pulling weeds, or I can deadhead my flowers. I can go for a walk around the neighborhood. Just being immersed in nature. Really, even this time of year when it's cold and we've got snow falling right now, even this time of year, that sort of resets me and helps keep me grounded. And then I can find more inspiration to write. And often I find things I want to write about. So I get topics just being out in nature and gardening. And I'm a master naturalist and I'm an Arkansas master gardener. So while I don't consider myself to be a nature writer per se, I do try to weave some of the natural elements into my writing. I feel like if I can incorporate sights and sounds and taste, that it helps to bring my writing alive. And I think the reader better can relate to stories like that. So just a quick peek at my books and a word about how I incorporate nature and gardening into my stories. So my first book, The Accidental Salvation of Gracie Lee, it's set on a farm, and that just evokes all the setting of a farm, right? The cotton, the smell of the cotton, the flat horizon. The weather plays a huge part in the Gracie Lee story. So that story, the setting is almost another character in that story, the Mississippi River that flows really close to the farm. So the farm setting and the garden, the family has a garden, and that's where some of their meals come from. And then in Gene Everywhere, like I said, it's set in Dallas, but because I was from Arkansas and my father-in-law was from Fort Smith, he was an excellent gardener, and he had a tomato garden. He had a vegetable garden, and he was a great grower of tomatoes. And so there were these conversations between the two of us, and he would share with me his tomato growing tips. And so food also played a big part in that book. And the weather played a huge role in that story because it happened to be the worst winter I ever spent in Dallas. We had almost 2 feet of snow in Dallas that year that he was with us. And so the weather and the nature of the weather really played into that story. And then Bernice Runs Away, my new book, it's also set initially in the Delta in Northeast Arkansas in a small rural area. And it starts during the fall, during the autumn. And so there's the sensation of farming and harvest. And then when Bernice decides to run away, she goes to the Ozarks, to a place she loves. And so the setting of the Ozarks during the fall is a big part of that story. And I think it also reflects the season of her life as she is 81 years old. And so I think as we age like that and we get older, we think back on nostalgia and seasons. And so that's one way I worked nature into that story. So farm. Farm is a huge inspiration for me. Like I said, I grew up on a farm, and this picture is a picture of our home place. That's where my mom grew up. There's a small little house there nestled in those trees, and that's the house my mom grew up in. That's where my sister and I spent many a night, many a weekend with my grandparents. And that's where, Christmas Eve dinner was taken around the dining room table, and summer days were spent in that backyard. We spent many a day walking the turn rows down to the ditch, and we looked for arrowheads. And so that is just a huge part of my life, that farm of ours. And then I grew up just a few miles from here. That's a picture of my grandfather in that black and white photo. But this is just a huge part of where I come from. It's where my personal story began. And so it's sort of the root of my writing. It usually farming and gardening, I think they kind of go hand in hand with nature for me. But there's usually that underlying theme that is reflected in most of my writing, no matter if I'm writing a novel or a short story or an article for, I write the Delta Child articles for Front Porch magazine, which is Arkansas Farm Bureau. But I always try to weave a little bit of farm magic and gardening into my stories. And then reading. For me, reading is a huge source of inspiration. I come from a family of people who valued books. And as a kid, our house was filled with books. I remember my parents reading, not only to me and to my sister, but they read novels, and reading and books were just a big part of our lives. And so as a kid, I was really lucky to grow up in such a rural area, but have access to 3 libraries. The school library, I went to Kaiser Elementary School. We had a great library at our school. And then we had a town library in Kaiser. And then Osceola, which was another little town close to where I grew up, that library. We went to all those libraries, and we'd check out the maximum numbers of books we could get and read them and share them. My sister and I would share them back and forth. And so books were always a huge part of my life. I always thought I would write a book. But now that I'm a writer, reading is even probably more important to me. I try to read 2 to 3 hours a day. I look at it as part of my job as a writer. It helps me, I think, become a better writer. Good writing inspires me to be a better writer. And not only just reading, but having books around. I think I draw inspiration from having just stacks of books in every room of my house. And I like to, now that I write, I really study. I read for enjoyment, but I also look at the way that sentences are put together, that paragraphs are structured. I think about Ernest Hemingway and how he talks about crafting your one true sentence. I think about Anne Lamott and her writing bird by bird, and the way classic books, authors of classic books, what makes those books classic, and how how those writers can write about a common, ordinary scene, yet make it seem so extraordinary. So I do agree with Stephen King that books are portable magic. And then vintage things. I get lots of inspiration from vintage things. I know that not everybody is going to find inspiration in the same things that I do, but vintage things for me, each old thing to me holds a history. And if I am writing and I need to take a break and I feel sort of stuck, I can walk through like a flea market or an antique store, and I always come away refreshed, and I always come away with ideas. And I think about these items. I may find something that reminds me of something from my childhood, or it may remind me of my grandmother. But I always think about the history of these things. All these items have a history, a story. I think about the person who maybe crafted the item, or saved money to buy it, or sold it, or lost it. The house where it maybe sat on a shelf for decades. Old houses have a charm and they inspire me. I've never lived in a new house. I've always lived in old houses. The house that my husband and I lived in Dallas was built in 1910. And then the house we bought here in Fayetteville was built in 1875. So we tend to like old houses. And I just think about the families that lived there before us. I feel like we're just caretakers. And I think about the lives that the house has seen. So these vintage things, like old photos, really give me things to think about and to write about. So that center picture is me with my Barbie. And if you've read The Accidental Salvation of Gracie Lee, you know that Gracie Lee loved her Barbies. And then the next picture is my grandmother and my Aunt Laverne. And I just, I can just study an old picture and think of all these stories that I want to write about. And so I think that travel is also something that inspires me. I just got back from Austin yesterday, where it was sunny and warm, and now it's snowing, but here. But travel, I think, moving from point A to point B, a change of perspective, a change of scenery, a different view out your window. I think that can be very inspirational. Does not have to be exotic travel. It can be a walk around your neighborhood. It can be a visit, to a place in your town that you've not been to, a park or a lake. I just think it's important to get up, get out, see something new, sort of shakes up your mind, and allows you to sort of refresh and reset. And I know that during the past few years, we've had to deal with coronavirus, and it's been harder to travel. And at some points, we've not even really been able to travel much. So staying home, but being able to travel through books or staycations in our own town, I think that's become even more and more important. And I feel that we are really lucky here in Arkansas to have so many wide open, gorgeous, natural spaces to take advantage of. So travel for me can mean just going to my backyard and sitting on a bench and doing some journaling. But I think it's important to see other people and get out and see how other people live. And it helps me stay grounded and to remind me that we're all pretty connected, but that we're not all the same, but we have a lot of similarities. And then music is a great inspiration for me. I think that every song is a story, and so I really pay attention to lyrics. when I was a kid, my dad actually, well, my mom installed speakers in the ceiling of every room in our house. And she thought this was just a great idea. And when she had parties, she could have music piped through all the rooms. Well, it was not that great of an idea because my dad, who was a farmer, got up around 4:30 or 5 every morning and would shove an 8-track tape in the player or crank up the radio, and we would hear Willie Nelson or Waylon Jennings blasted through the house, and that's how we woke up every day. And I think it gave me a love of country music. I love country music, but I started paying attention to those words and those lyrics. And I also think gospel music. I grew up in a little small church and singing those gospel hymns. I think that's great inspiration for me too. When I write, I like to think about the music and the soundtrack that would fit what I'm writing. So I don't listen to music while I write, but I do later try to put um, my pieces to music. So I created an actual playlist for my Accidental Salvation of Gracie Lee book. It's on my author website if you're interested, but it's a lot of songs that I felt like fit the book, a lot of songs from the 70s, even some church music, because a lot of that story takes place in the little Baptist church in Savage Crossing. So I think that thinking about the music that fits the words that I'm putting together and the story that I'm trying to tell helps me as a writer get into the tone and the feel of the story in that setting. And then also I try to I get a lot of inspiration from other writers and other creatives. As a writer, a lot of writers are introverts. And so it's really easy for us to stay at home and write all day long. Um, I consider myself to be an extroverted introvert. So I sort of like a combination, but I love being at home writing. And so sometimes I have to remind myself that I need to get out and I need to be around other writers because there's sort of a synergy that works when you are around other creative people and other writers. So I try to go to the Hemingway Pfeiffer writing retreat and museum once a year for their writing retreats. I find those to be very inspirational, not just the mentors and the writing instruction that I get, but just being around those other writers. And then I like to also spend some time writing at Dairy Hollow, which is a writing colony at Eureka Springs, which is pretty close to me. But I do think, whether it's taking an online class about writing or like a poetry class, a short story writing class, um, taking a class at the library, any of those chances that you have to be around other writers and other creative people really help. For me, they help me. It just kind of spurs on my brain, I guess. So my mantra is to try to do something creative every day. Um, I think this is really important, especially for someone trying to write and trying to be creative. So even if it's 20 minutes a day, I just think it's important to set some time, some personal time aside and do something fun. Whether for me, that could be trying out a new recipe. I could, in the summertime, go out and cut some flowers and arrange them in a vase. I may sketch in my journal. I may draw. I may color. I still like to color. I think, as children, we spend a lot of time doing creative things. We're very creative when we're kids. We finger paint, we draw, we tell stories, we do plays. And I think as we get older, we tend to pull away from that. I think society pushes us away from that in many ways. And so it's really easy to lose touch with that part of yourself, but I feel like it's still there. And if we can tap into that, it really will help us sort of mentally reset every day, and it'll help us later to do the harder work that we need to do. So, um, in summary, there are several things that inspire me, and I've gone through some of them. There are obviously other things that inspire me. I like to spend time with family and friends. I like to walk my dogs. I think inspiration can come from a really good night's sleep. Don't underestimate the power of a nap. Um, but all the inspiration in the world is really not going to get you from point A to point B. It's not going to get that project done or that book written, that to-do list tackled unless you actually sit down and do the work. But I will also say that for me, I can't speak for everyone, but for me, there is inspiration in the actual doing the actual thing of sitting down and writing. I get even more inspiration. So, if you do have a dream of writing, and I think most people, there are a lot of people who want to write. If you will sit down and just start doing the writing, you may find that you think of even more things to write about. You will be more inspired. Um, Inspiration in the doing, that's where a lot of the magic happens for me. So I want to pivot just for a few minutes and talk about the importance of telling our stories. Um, I think we're all storytellers. I think we all have thousands of stories to tell. And I'm just a really big believer in writing down your stories, whether it's a diary, whether it's a journal, um, record them on a little tape recorder, even if it's stories that, you don't ever plan to publish, but you just want to write them down for maybe your kids or your grandkids. I think it's important that we do that. Um, we have lots of stories in our families that have been passed down to us, and it's really sort of up to us to keep those stories alive. Um, I'm assuming that every family has some stories that are repeated and told over and over, like at family reunions. Um, these are the stories that get a little bit taller with each telling. Um, so that they're almost like tall tales. But one in our family is my uncle who lived in Louisiana. He wrestled this big alligator, and there's a picture there. It's sort of grainy, but every year at the family reunion, that story was told how he wrestled this alligator and he put it in this truck and he drove it around town, and everybody saw this alligator. So these are just stories that if we don't tell them, if we don't write them down, they will be lost. And then this picture in front of this cabin. So this is my great, I think, grandparents, Nathan and Alice Johnson. And I can look up their name. I've looked up their names on some genealogy work that I did, but I don't know these people. I don't know anything about their stories, and I'm sure they had incredible stories. So I read from the National Archives Department that a piece of oral history is lost within 3 generations. So that's why it's so important for us to tell these stories. And then a person, most people are completely forgotten within 4 generations. So I just thought, that's kind of a sad thing to think that people and stories disappear that quickly if we don't write them down. And then this is my grandmother in the middle. She's the tallest lady in that picture, and her siblings. And I do know these people. I remember them as a child, and they've all passed away now. But, these people, I can tell you stories about most of them. I incorporate things about them in lots of the stories that I tell and that I write. My Aunt Virgie, who's in the little pink dress, she lived in this house that had no running water. She had an outhouse that we thought was very fun to use. And she had a pump outside her kitchen that we would go pump the water and drink from a long handle dipper, which we thought that was cool too. And she made the best pie crust for us and would just sprinkle it with cinnamon and sugar. And, we played in the chicken coop at her house. But these are just, it's not been that long ago. And this type of lifestyle is gone. And, I just keep repeating myself, I know, but I feel like it's so important that we pass these stories down in a written format if we can, so that younger generations remember. And these are the people who we came from, these people, and we like to think we make our own stories, but these people molded us, and these people helped us form our stories, I guess. Okay, so this is the end of my presentation. I've put my contact information up there. I'm happy to answer any questions that you have. And Shannon, are you there?
I am here. And it's lovely that you mentioned questions because we have a few. Let me just see if I can post them. I'm going to leave your slide up so people can have time to note your email address and your web address and all that. Let's see. So this is from Alan Robinette, lovely Alan Robinette over at the Saline County Library. And he loves Bernice.
Great.
Says she's a little sassy. He's got some questions for us too. Let's see. Here we go. What made you decide to make Bernice's character a librarian?
Okay, so in my next life, I want to be a librarian. So I have several librarians that I've always loved from my childhood. And, I just think it's just a great career. And so I thought that's what I would do for Bernice, make her a librarian.
That's what I'm, taking notes. So Talya Boerner, maybe up for library work. Okay.
Yeah, for sure.
Wonderful. Okay, and you answered, is she based off someone you know? So also, do you think writers bulldoze their way through writer's block, or do you do better by taking a break?
Well, I don't know if I've ever technically really had writer's block. I get tired and I just need to take a break because I will sit and work for hours and hours, and I know that's not good. And so for me, just getting up, going for a walk, or reading, and then I can come back to it and I feel fresh again.
Lovely. Well, and so many of the things that you mentioned are those restarters, to get you back into the new day. So.
Right. And another thing that I do that I did not mention, and this is something that I learned from Crescent Dragon Wagon.
Yes.
Is to make lists. And so if I get stuck in a scene that I'm writing, if I make a list of all the things maybe that character is thinking, or all the things in that room, like the physical objects, that really helps me get unstuck in that scene. Just having a list of objects and maybe even like smells and sounds, and it just kind of helps me get back into that scene.
I have never heard of that before. That is lovely. I've heard about sort of like those micro beat sheets where you go thought to thought from character to character, but not inside one mind. That is lovely. Okay, and then Alan had some other questions. Let's see. When you're reading and come across a word you're not familiar with, do you stop and look it up? Or do you try to glean its meaning from the context?
I kind of do a combination. If I'm really lazy, I won't look it up. If I'm like really into the story and I don't want to stop, I won't. But sometimes I do.
Yeah. Well, and it's funny because do you ever come across a word that you kind of feel like you know it until somebody asks you for the definition? So
yeah, sometimes I think I do, and then later I'll go back and look it up just to make sure. And I might be wrong. And it's funny, my editor, the lady who edited all three of my books, is from Jerusalem.
wow.
And it's really funny because she has just a tremendous vocabulary. But I think there have been 2 or maybe 3 phrases that she learned from my books. And she would be like, I have never heard this. One of them, well, these are mostly like Southern type phrases like honeydew list. She had never heard that. She's like, I'm going to start using a honeydew list for my husband. And then I think I had used understory, just referring to nature and the understory of the trees and the forest. And she had never heard that, which I thought was interesting. But
hadn't either. Do you want to go into that a little bit more?
It was just, and maybe it's just from my master naturalist classes, but you know, the understory underneath the canopy of the tree is up here, and then the understory is what's kind of growing on the ground, and maybe like ferns or even like pine needles that fall, and you'll see like lichen, and that's kind of the understory. And I just used that phrase in a description of something totally unrelated to the forest, but she's like, I don't know this word. And I thought, oh, taught her a word.
That's amazing. Okay, so I have to ask because I am kind of a little bit of a not so knowledgeable, but a tree fanatic. And are you a fan of Peter Wohlleben's book, The Hidden Life of Trees?
Yes, for sure.
So do you subscribe to his theory about the communication between, the tree roots and the fungi and all that?
Well, I never knew about that until I read his book. And now I think about that. And like, if I see a tree out, I feel really sad. Like when I'm home on the farm, is particularly, I'll see like a lone tree out in a field. And I'll think that tree, who's it talking to?
Yes.
But yeah, I think that's a fascinating book. And there's so much in the natural world that we don't understand. We just kind of live right here. And there's so much going on and so much life in just a little inch of, the soil or whatever.
I love that. Well, I remember just feeling so excited when you were talking about your Aunt Verdi and seeing her in that picture. I didn't want to interrupt you, but just that beautiful crisp dress. And you said she didn't have running water. And I can't imagine, I think it's a hardship to get my clothes through the washer and dryer and into the closet. But
yeah, she did not have running water. And I think when I was I think like either high school, like a senior in high school or in college, my cousin ran running water to her house, and she did not want it. And then she would not use it. Like she thought it was a waste of money. But yeah, such a different life, but it was such a rich life. And we loved to go there and stay and play. And, just, I could probably write a whole book just based on her and her life.
I was going to ask, do you have like a running set of notes to pass down in your family?
I do journal. I write usually every day, just whatever's going on that day. Or I've also gotten into phenology lately, which is sort of the study of cyclical things in nature, like migration and hibernation and how they occur over and over every year. And so I've been keeping sort of a nature journal of something in nature I see every day. And so at the end of the year, I will have these charts that I think will be almost like artwork. It's like a wheel, like a wheel with every day is a spoke. So
Oh my goodness.
I'm kind of a nature nerd.
Now, I'm so excited to hear this. This is wonderful. So I write in a different genre, but nature is definitely my biggest inspiration and excitement there. So let's see. That was the end of our questions. Did you have anything else you wanted to share with our viewers tonight?
I know I kind of went through everything pretty fast, but I guess I will say that I do have a blog. It's called Grace Grits and Gardening, and I would love for you to check it out. And I try to write a Sunday letter every Sunday, and then I have an author website, talyatateBoerner.com, but it includes book club questions. So if you are in a book club and you're interested in my books, I do have questions for each book. And then I also try to visit book clubs. So if your book club selects my book and invites me, I will probably come to your book club. I've been to probably 60 in the last few years, all around Arkansas and Texas and Tennessee. And so some have been on Zoom, but most are in person. So I've got several scheduled. I think I have like 12 scheduled between now and June. So hit me up and I'll come to your book club.
That is so exciting. Okay, what is that like, sitting there with people who have read your book and just discussing
Well,
multiple?
I've discovered that it's my favorite thing about being an author is meeting with book clubs and talking about the book that way, rather than like at a bookstore, having a bookstore signing. Because in that situation, you never know who's going to show, if anybody's going to show up. And the people that do come typically have not read the book yet. And so they may just be somebody that happens in. And, that to me is not as much fun as being invited and going and you're talking to people who've actually read the book. And so you can really get into the details and get the reader's take on the story. And so that's just a lot of fun. Yes. And I've met so many cool people, and I always walk away with just some moment that I think, wow, this is why I do this. This is why I write. And it's not because of the book. It's usually some connection I've made with somebody that's there.
Yes, absolutely. That's my favorite thing, is to be able to put something on the page and have it convey and somebody understands.
Yeah. Or it's somebody that you find out that they grew up on a farm really close to where I grew up, or, they knew somebody that, like one lady I met, her dad or grandfather actually founded the church that's based on the church in my first book. I mean, just kind of chill bump moments.
Yeah, absolutely. Wow. Well, I appreciate so much that you sat down with me, for this time to talk about your books and to share about sort of your process. Oh, goodness. Okay. Before I close, I do need to ask. So you mentioned that you spend 2 to 3 hours a day reading, and I have read that about so many authors. Could you tell us about pretty much your entire day? Like, what does your day look like when you're working on a book?
So I get up really early. I think I get that from my dad. I was trained to get up at the crack of dawn, before dawn. So I get up around 5 every day, and I start writing. And so I journal first and drink my coffee, and I'll work on whatever project I'm working on. But I usually do that until about 7:30, 8, and then the dogs need a break. And so, we feed them, take them for a walk, and then I'll try to write until about lunchtime. And then in the afternoon, my afternoons look a little different. Sometimes I read, sometimes, maybe working on social media or something else. but the morning is mostly devoted to writing. And then later in the day is when I do my reading.
Lovely.
And I love to read. So my 3 favorite things are reading, writing, and gardening. So those are my things.
And when do you find time for the gardening? Do you do that on different days, or do you have like a spot in the afternoon? Or
Yeah, I have to just kind of, it's hard to juggle sometimes, like in the spring when it's really prime time to be out working in the yard. I just sort of take turn. I'll do my writing in the morning. That never changes. And then I'll go out and do a couple of hours of yard work and deadhead, and then go back in and just kind of back and forth. I know some people that are like, I have to work all day on this project and I can't mix and match, but I can like mix it up.
wonderful. Well, thank you. And I really appreciate you coming to do this author talk. And everybody, Bernice Runs Away. You can find it on Amazon. You said Walmart.com and your author website. And hopefully we'll have it soon. Pardon?
And Barnes and Noble.
And Barnes and Noble, and hopefully soon here at the Garland County Library.
Great.
So, thank you.
Thank you, Shannon.